Okay, hi everyone. My name is Tyann, and I am a TEAM-CBT trainer based out of Oklahoma City. And today I'm going to share with you about a treatment modality called I-CBT, Inference-Based Cognitive Behavioral Therapy for OCD. And so it's a treatment approach that's been developed by Frederick Ardema, and I'm slipping on the first name of the other creator. His last name's O'Connor. He's no longer present. He has just passed away, but Frederick Ardema continues to do research and develop this treatment modality. The more I learn about it, the more I realize just how brilliant it really is in helping us understand OCD on a deeper level. And many of my clients who have struggled with ERP have found that I-CBT just takes them to the level of healing that they were looking for. And so I'm excited to go through this with you. My hope is that I could get through modules 1 through 6, but one of my weaknesses is I get overly ambitious on the material. And so we'll play by ear. At least I'll try to get 1 through 4 or 5, but I'll aim to get through 1 through 6. And then for part 2, I'll get to modules 7 through 12 with you all. Okay. And one of my passions is just whenever I get stuck, finding what works for people. And so you'll see in my process, even as I'm doing I-CBT, I just integrate whatever processes that I think could potentially be helpful for the clients that I'm working with. So I'll share with you as well some of my TEAM-CBT integrations and also IFS integrations that have helped some of my clients get unstuck and move forward with their healing process. All right, so starting out on understanding inference-based cognitive behavioral therapy, which we call I-CBT. But people first just want to know what's an inference. So an inference, according to this approach, is just a conclusion that's reached based on evidence and reasoning. So it's a type of conclusion that's reached on the basis of evidence and reasoning for a person. We'll see in OCD, there's often what they call inferential confusion. And this is where there's a state of confusing the imagination and reality on the basis of misusing their logic and reasoning. And also, you'll see a piece of really distrusting the senses and the self. And so, through my training in this process, wanting to really give a plug for the OCD training school. My main trainer has been Bronwyn Schroyer, but the other 2 trainers are also really awesome, and I've heard great things about them. But through this training, they really see OCD is actually a disorder of trust, a disorder of just not trusting the self and the senses. And that's our ultimate goal, to help them to get back to a space where they do trust themselves and their senses. And then to also see that with OCD, there's a different type of reasoning that they're using than they typically use in all other types of settings or situations where OCD doesn't touch for them. Okay. So that is just the overall definition of inference and inferential confusion. And when we're talking about testing, as you all know, in TEAM-CBT, a big piece is in the T is testing, where we're just doing measurements. And I really like the inferential confusion questionnaire. I use the Y box as well. That's the Yale-Brown obsessive compulsive scale. I use that, and I also use the ICQ, the inferential confusion questionnaire, with all of my clients. And the cutoff score for that is 93. And so let me just screen share that with you. I meant to share that first. And I can send a copy of this to all of you as well. But this is the inferential confusion questionnaire that I give to all clients. Let me just zoom in there. Can you all see that okay? Let me look at the preview. And so they go through this 30-question questionnaire, to see, are there moments that they really struggle with confusing the imagination with reality? Are they struggling with a different type of logic and reasoning like we typically see in OCD? And then moments of just really distrusting the senses and the self. And so you could just see some of those sample questions that will assess for all of that. Like I sometimes am more convinced about what might be, sorry, there's a typo, versus what I actually see. So that's just assessing that they don't quite trust their senses in reality. Sometimes the imagination is feeling more powerful for them. And then it is 30 questions. And the total that you could get, the highest total is 180. And the cutoff score is 93. So we see that we all have inferential confusion. For example, like if you've related to putting your foot outside of the cover, but then imagining like, oh, what if there's a monster under the bed that grabs my feet? Even though I know there's no truth in that, I may still move my feet under the cover again just to feel a bit more secure and safe. We may have all related to moments like that where the imagination feels more powerful than what I know to be true in reality. And then I still act on it by moving my foot away from the edge and putting the covers over it just to feel more secure. So we all have inferential confusion, but in OCD, the cutoff score is 93 and higher is where we typically see if it's inferential confusion to the level of 93 and higher, then it's really indicative of OCD or someone who struggles with OCD. And then if they score 93 or higher on the inferential confusion questionnaire, then I-CBT will likely be a really helpful treatment approach for them. And so I give this to them at the beginning of treatment, and then in the middle, and then also at the end, just to see if there's been changes for people. And for many people, it drastically starts to decrease by the middle of the treatment process. And by the end, they often get out of the OCD level of inferential confusion, which is really cool and inspiring to see. I just have a lot of passion for this work because I think OCD has been one of those struggles that have been the most painful to observe just the torment that people can go through. I just remember a client who, like, it hurt me to look at her hands all the way up to her elbows. Like the first layer of her skin was like stripped because she washed her hands so frequently, and it's just looking glaring red. The skin looks so tight and painful and would have cracks in them. Because she would wash her hands upwards 100 times a day just to feel safe. And so just seeing the torment of OCD and then seeing that there's processes that can really get people healing in that has just been really moving and inspiring to really see. So let me go ahead then and jump into the first module because I know people really appreciate just having more of not just talking about the philosophy and the process, but really seeing what goes on. So I'm just going to review for you how I walk through the client through these modules. Just a heads up, this is a fast, like in a nutshell summary of the process. If you really want to learn and practice each module, I highly recommend the small group practice through the OCD training school. And they've taken on just the structure that I find to be really helpful, which is they'll do didactics. It's a small group. The trainer will then do a demo for each module, and then we'll get a chance to practice. And so I had provided them this feedback about TEAM-CBT training and how that's been the most helpful way for us to deepen our learning. And they've really structured this small group around that structure of didactics, demos, and practice. So I highly recommend that if you have any passion about OCD work and want to learn this model more in depth. Okay. So the first module talks about the OCD sequence. We see that all forms of OCD follows this sequence for people. It starts off with a trigger and then goes into an obsessional doubt. And then I just share with them a bit of education about what is an obsessional doubt. An obsessional doubt is just a doubt that they have that's a possibility or a what if in their mind. So it's like, what if I could harm my children? What if I am actually lesbian instead of heterosexual? And so they have these what ifs, but I share with them that there's a difference between reasonable doubts and obsessional doubts. So there's a trigger, but in OCD, it becomes an obsessional doubt because obsessional doubts actually use a different logic. They don't have here and now evidence. It's almost all in the imagination without using any here and now evidence. And a reasonable doubt does have here and now evidence. Okay. And also, what's different between the two is reasonable doubts are easily resolved. Obsessional doubts, the more you try to resolve them or figure them out, the more you can get lost and you feel more doubtful. And so an example could be just wondering, like, what if I uh, what if I forgot to turn off the oven? Right. So in order for that to be obsessional, it's what if I forgot to turn off the oven, but I actually did see myself turn it off. I did come over and then I did sense that the oven was cool. I remember seeing that light turn off, but then I leave the house and I have this thought that says, but what if I forgot? What if I thought I saw I turned it off, but I didn't? And so that becomes obsessional. When it's a reasonable doubt, it's like, what if I forgot to turn off the stove? What was going on though? I was actually sensing something was warmer, right? Like it was warmer, and then when I look at it, I can actually see that it's still on. And then once I go and I turn it off, then I trust my senses and I trust myself, and then I move on. And so the reasonable versus obsessional doubt can have the same content, but the obsessional doubt then kind of stays stuck in their imagination despite no here and now evidence, and it doesn't get resolved like a reasonable doubt will. I have an exercise later on to have you all practice what is reasonable or what is obsessional. But I just give that brief education on what is an obsessional doubt. So there's a trigger, then you'll have an obsessional doubt, a possibility, of what if, and then it goes into really seeing this consequence of the doubt. It's a powerful consequence, usually something that's really terrifying or scary. So if I forgot to turn off the oven, the consequence is I see my house burning down. It burns down everything that matters to us, our property, our dog dies after we leave. And so seeing that consequence, it's usually very vivid. It's a powerful story where they're the center of being impacted by it. And then, of course, it drives anxiety, where I just talk about then in the sequence, when you see that consequence in that story, anxiety can really show up for them in a very powerful way. So then I would just ask, when you feel that, when you see that consequence, what do you feel in your body? What shows up for you? And very easily they could say, right now I could feel my chest is tightening. It's hard to breathe. I feel really activated in my arms and my muscles. My heart is racing. So that's the anxiety that comes on. And then when they feel this and it feels so real, their body is feeling that danger. Of course, they would do everything that they can to prevent that really bad thing from happening. Right? So that is the brief overview of the first module. It's just sharing the sequence, and that I-CBT will be addressing the obsessional doubt. We believe that we can address OCD more upstream versus where ERP, which is also wonderful and very effective, and I still use it with some clients who don't really have obsessional doubts. Like if they have like just needing a just right feeling, I would still use ERP with them. But we're not addressing stopping their compulsions or addressing the anxiety. We're really going more upstream to address the obsessional doubts in I-CBT. And then what would happen with the sequence if we could address the obsessional doubt and they could know that that is actually not based on reality, then the rest of this will fall apart. Then I'm not so terrified of the consequences. I'm not feeling that horrible sensation in my body, and then I don't need to do any compulsions. And one of the most powerful first time I was using this was a client. I didn't even do any exposure with her, but she would have a compulsion every time she ate. And I'm just trying to preserve confidentiality, but every time she ate, she had to do something to make sure that it was safe and that she wouldn't choke. And then by mid-module, like by the seventh module, we're just reassessing again how that doubt is impacting her. Like it's unsafe for me to eat. What if something bad happens when I eat? And she had naturally stopped that compulsion without me doing any exposure and response prevention. And I was just so impressed with that process. And it really made me buy into this approach on seeing that, wow, we didn't have to do any exposures for you to stop those compulsions every time that you eat, do a fear hierarchy in any way. And you just naturally stopped because then you started to trust your senses more. You trusted a different type of reasoning um, that allowed you to move forward. Right? Okay, and then through this module, we just have them give them a lot of different examples. The whole point of this process is just letting them know one person with OCD may have a lot of different themes, and we hope that these themes can just help them to not feel alone, decrease the shame, but help them to also learn about the OCD process. So this is someone who has a harm theme that I'll just hit somebody with my car. And so the trigger is just everyday life. We're leaving the house, we're getting into our car, we're cooking food, and the obsessional doubt kicks in on maybe I'll hit someone when I'm driving. And I see the consequence that they die. And my clients paint a lot more than just that person dies. They die, I go to jail, I lose my life. There's just a whole consequence, a powerful, vivid one. And then what are you feeling right now? As you imagine that consequence, well, I just feel so much guilt in my system. I can't live with it. A lot of anxiety. It's hard for me to even breathe right now. My chest is tight. I'm feeling really scared. I even feel tears well up behind my eyes. So those are the common responses that I see from people. And then, of course, when you're feeling this very real fear, what then are you feeling the urge to do to then feel better? So it's engaging in this compulsion. And in I-CBT, they see like compulsions is actually not quite there to help us feel better. It's just to really try to prevent this bad thing from happening. Because sometimes compulsions can actually be very torturous. I'm not feeling better while I'm doing it. I feel like I just can't stop. And if I stop, something horrible will happen. So sometimes in engaging in compulsions, it's actually not creating a lot of relief for people. Sometimes it's just in their mind, I can't stop because I don't want that bad thing to happen. So I'll check my mirrors, and it's things that they are engaging in doing, but it's also things that they're avoiding. We see that as compulsions as well. So you may see in some of the teaching, it's compulsive avoidance or compulsions and avoidance. And then there's just a lot of different themes here that you can see and look through. You have the slides. So someone who's afraid to get sick from contamination. This is pedophilia OCD or POCD. I'm afraid I'll molest my children or my nieces and nephews. And just going through all of these themes can often help people to see like, wow, I'm really not alone in this. This is someone who feels like they could lose control and just punch an elderly person. And then sexual orientation OCD. One that's coming up too a lot for people could be relationship OCD. Like, what if what if I don't love my partner enough? What if it isn't true love? What if they are cheating on me? And I've seen this with clients. And if that is an example, I may just share that for them if it's something that they relate to. And then there's no here and now evidence, but it feels like it could be true. And so they wonder that about their relationship and obsess about it. And it could really end up impacting their connection. And so I go through the modules with them, I go through the slides, and then at the end of every module, I just send them this practice card. And there's also supplemental material that the OCD training school provides through their free Facebook group with Frederick Artema. So I would recommend going through that process as well. But once I took their training, they just provided these really beautiful handouts that we can send to clients where they can read up on the modules a little bit more, understand it better, and then I send them this practice card. And so just an example on what they do is I just have them read this and then I review it with them. So for the next week, just have yourself take a step back and just be aware of the obsessional sequence. So this obsessional sequence is just that pattern. When you find yourself engaging in a compulsion, just think back on what triggered me to do that. And then what was my obsessional doubt? What was I afraid to happen with the consequence? How did that impact my feelings and my body with the anxiety? And then they could just, again, have this more bird's eye view of what is this process like? And at first, when I was learning this treatment process, I thought it was so much like examine the evidence. And I had really skeptical parts because I knew, like, okay, I've tried to examine the evidence with OCD. I've tried more traditional CBT, and it just seems to get them more tangled in the process. The more I'm learning this, the more I'm realizing it's not about examining the evidence. It's about having this bird's eye view of the process of OCD. And once they have a better understanding of it, they have more power over it. And so the analogy I really like that one of the I-CBT trainers, Katie Marotte, uses is she says, ERP and I-CBT are both powerful treatment approaches for OCD. And you can imagine, like, if someone's really scared of a haunted house, ERP has them go through the haunted house over and over and over again. That's exposure. And doing response prevention. Don't run away, don't avoid, don't try to attack the ghosts, etc. Don't pray about it. Don't ruminate about it. And so that's exposure and response prevention. Go through the haunted house 5 times, 10 times. And then when it's a fear-based OCD, their bodies will habituate. It'll decrease that anxiety. I-CBT, instead of having them go through that haunted house over and over, it turns on all of the lights in the haunted house. And then they can see all of the inner mechanisms of this haunted house and how OCD works. And then when it comes out, when the ghost comes back in. And so once all of the lights are turned on, they see how it works and it's not so terrifying anymore. Now I understand it. Now I see how it's impacted. I see how it works, and then I have more power over it. Okay. So this first piece is, again, having that bird's eye view of OCD, a more observer's view of, let me just understand the sequence. Instead of being absorbed in the content and getting stuck in the obsessional doubts, let me just see the sequence that comes up. Okay, how are we doing so far? Any thoughts or questions about that process? I'll have a bit more of a audience participation soon, so you're not just hearing me talk here. Okay, I'm just pulling up the chat. Yeah, someone said they experience the stove sometimes. Again, we've all had inferential confusion in that process, and we can all relate to that. Yeah, liking the haunted house analogy, really appreciating the process. Yeah, I'm glad. Oh, Lee's one of our awesome TEAM-CBT trainers. So grateful that she's here. Is it Jing? Am I pronouncing that right? You have your hand up.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. This is really wonderful. I was just wondering, how are you going to differentiate or decide, like, usually like with OCD, you want to do exposure, but with the
Uh-huh.
I-CBT, like, do you
Yeah,
still do exposure? I guess, like, it's
question.
kind of, this is really great, and it just kind of not the traditional kind of practice,
Mhm.
right?
Oh, I
but I
know,
really like it.
exactly. We
Yeah.
we all know ERP, right? That's been the most research. It's been around and it's been very powerful in healing, helping people reclaim their lives from OCD. And if I'm hearing right, the question is, how do you know what to use and when to use it?
Right.
And
Like,
so when
how are you going to decide which one to
mm,
use OCD patient?
exactly. Yeah, how do you know what to decide? Am I going to use ICBT or ERP with the person? So
Right.
while I was learning ICBT, I actually just really wanted to learn this process. And if any client scored 93 or higher on the inferential confusion questionnaire, I use ICBT with them. And when they had OCD or identified as having that struggle, I haven't seen anyone have a lower score than 93. And once I started to learn ICBT, it's actually become my most used and my preferred treatment approach for OCD, just because I feel like it really helps them have a deeper understanding of this process. And ICBT believes that we can help them to resolve that doubt, not just do exposure and stop the compulsions, which then can sometimes get kind of messy because when they have like five different themes, we may be doing exposure for this theme and then another one pops up, and then I'm doing exposure for sexual orientation OCD. I'm doing one for pedophilia, another for contamination, because in one person there can be often multiple themes. And so for me personally, I use ICBT until I get to a stuck point. And then moments when I use ERP still is usually like when there isn't an obsessional doubt. There isn't a what if or a possibility. So usually like when they have that like I'm trying to think of the like just needing to balance out like something like just right. I need to do this, then it'll feel just right. If I don't do it, it won't feel right. So if I tap my left leg, I need to tap my right leg too. I find that I-CBT isn't as helpful when there isn't an obsessional doubt. And so with those, there may need to be exposure and response prevention. Did that answer your question, Jing? I'm hoping it did, and ultimately it's really dependent on your style, what works for you, what works for your client, really being flexible. I really love Rich Gallagher's approach as well. And then I'll share that with you towards the end on that handout that I sent you with the here and now exposure. That one is a bit more of act and just letting them expose themselves to just whatever they're ready for. So one size does not fit all in OCD treatment. It's really a willingness and an openness to connect with our clients, see what's effective, troubleshooting, and applying with just what resonates with you as a therapist and what resonates with your clients as well. So moving forward to module 2, this one is now sharing with the client that OCD often has this different reasoning process. And when you have an obsessional doubt, these are the reasoning processes that makes you want to believe the doubt more. It strengthens the doubt, it makes the doubt more powerful. Okay. And then I'll share with you the example that I really like that have resonated with clients where we have typical reasoning. And in typical reasoning, we actually don't use any of these reasoning devices. And for a client with OCD to know that there are many areas in their lives that the OCD reasoning doesn't touch at all, that OCD doesn't touch at all. More often than not, they actually use typical reasoning. But when it's OCD, these are the reasoning devices that they typically see through Frederick Ardema's research. Again, I think it's just really brilliant how he came about with all of this and really seeing the patterns and the underlying mechanisms of OCD. And so, for example, with a client who is afraid that they didn't turn off the oven or the stove, we may see them pull in all of these reasoning devices. Right? So there's facts. The fact is, human beings' memories are flawed. And so Sometimes people do forget to do things, right? That's a fact. And so they'll pull that in. People forget to do things. Since that's the case, maybe I have as well. There's rules that they want to follow. And when we talk about rules, it could be societal rules, cultural rules, or family rules, because sometimes the rules is just in their upbringing. It's very important for us to keep people safe. And so, what if I forgot to turn on that oven? The rule I'm following is I need to keep our home safe, keep my dog safe, my family safe. And so that drives that possibility to be stronger. And then it strengthens my doubt. OCD may also pull in hearsay. I heard a story. I heard on social media someone's house burnt down because they forgot. I read a story, someone was smoking a cigarette and then it burnt down their house. And so maybe I could as well. I'll forget to turn on the oven. And so you'll see that reasoning come in. Personal experience could be there was a time in the past when I forgot to turn off the stove. And so that's my personal experience and what I've been through. And even though that was 10 years ago or 5 years ago, I'm pulling that into today to make it more relevant, right? Or I remember someone was careless or this happened to their house. And so because of that personal experience, my doubt could be true. And possibility is anything I imagine could be possible. So if it feels true, I can imagine it. It feels like I need to do something in reality about it. So in this module, I really want them to understand that this is the typical reasoning process that comes with the OCD. And then there are many areas in their life that the OCD reasoning doesn't touch at all. They have typical reasoning. So I would bring up an example like, is there an everyday thing that you do that you just really don't have a doubt about? So you never wonder like, oh, did I really put on my shirt? What if I forgot to brush my teeth? So usually these are areas that I haven't seen clients have obsessional doubts about. And then they would be able to see that in these areas, I have a different reasoning process. So it's not about assessing, is there here and now evidence? Is there trying to examine the evidence? It's seeing that when there's typical reasoning, I then actually don't doubt my senses and I don't pull in these areas. So I even have them look at whatever example resonated with them. And so let's say they chose brushing teeth. So I would say, have you ever had a doubt after you brush your teeth on like, what if I didn't brush my teeth? They would say, no, not really. And then for them to understand the mechanisms of OCD, I said, what if you did have OCD and these reasoning processes with brushing your teeth? What would that be looking like? And they start to kind of have fun with this. So if someone had OCD around, what if I didn't brush my teeth? What kind of facts would they use? What stories would they pull in? What rules would they try to follow? What's the personal experience? And so they would say, okay, if I had OCD around brushing my teeth, I would say, oh, I heard a story about someone who didn't brush their teeth and they got a lot of cavities, and then that traveled to their heart and caused heart problems. There's also facts about not brushing your teeth can create harm and abscesses in your tooth that could cause a lot of issues. I've had a personal experience where there was a time when I went to work and then I realized I didn't brush my teeth. And so maybe this is the case as well. And then they start to kind of laugh about this because they say, I just know I brush my teeth and I don't question that. I don't say the rules is we should just really care about hygiene. And then I don't get stuck in possibility. What if that happens to me? If that happened to this other person, what if that happens to me that I also forgot to brush my teeth? And I would just ask them, what would that be like to have that OCD reasoning process around brushing your teeth? They said that would be just really exhausting. And realizing, oh, this is actually what goes on in other areas of my life where OCD touches. And then I would say, so how do you know that you did brush your teeth? And that you're not trying to pull in all of these reasoning devices to then really get absorbed in that doubt. Again, we're just seeing how OCD is constructed so they can understand the process, right? So the first four modules is understanding how OCD is constructed. 5 through 12 is then deconstructing OCD. And then they would say, well, I know I brushed my teeth because I just know that I did. I would say, how do you know? And they would say, I would say, like, anything in your senses that would help you to know, or is there something that you're trusting that's allowing you to know? And they would say, I could still smell the mint on my breath. I can taste it. I just know that I did it. And then I move forward with my life. And I just trust myself as someone who follows this process, follows this pattern that I brush my teeth before I leave the house because I care about people not smelling my hot breath. I'm considerate in that way. And then they just trust it and move forward. And then I just share with the client our ultimate goal is for them to apply this typical reasoning to their OCD, to areas where their OCD currently touches. Let's see if they can begin to apply this typical reasoning where I just know, I can just trust. Because typical reasoning applies evidence and logic, and we just trust it, and then we move forward with our lives. Okay. So you could go through these examples with them. These are just examples where we talk about going off theme. And a piece that I want to emphasize is going off theme really helps them to learn the process better. So starting out with their theme can just be a little bit too activating. So if they're currently really afraid of contamination, going through this process on theme can just get them a little bit too activated. And so going off theme is just someone else's OCD that they haven't related to, just helps them to learn the process better. And then I can ask them about their own OCD. So going off theme just helps the learning process. They're not as activated or anxious. And then we can apply what they've learned to their own OCD. So you could have them apply, maybe they are a person who've never been afraid that glass is in their children's food. And then we just have them understand if you were this person who was afraid that glass is in your children's food, what kind of reasoning devices could you use in OCD that could strengthen that doubt? They could understand how this process works with their own theme or their own OCD, just one of their doubts that we've tracked in their sequence. And then from there, they could pull in their doubt and just see what type of OCD reasoning they've typically used to strengthen their doubt and to make them believe that doubt more. And they're just starting to, again, the lights are turned on that haunted house. They're understanding their OCD more. They're seeing like, oh, this is the reasoning that comes in that makes me believe that doubt more. And I actually have many areas in my life where OCD reasoning doesn't touch at all, that I can trust with brushing my teeth or putting on my clothes. I don't then tell myself, oh, I heard a story of someone who walked out of their house naked because they were out of their mind. So maybe that could be the case for me. I just know I have a shirt on. I can see it. I trust it. I trust my common sense that I'm someone who puts on clothes before I leave. I trust my true self as someone who's decent. And then I move forward. And then what's usually really helpful. So I still get confused with the tricks and cheats of OCD. There's 10 of them. This is module 10 in the treatment process. And I've really liked, if I'm realizing if I get confused with knowing all 10 of the tricks and cheats, then maybe my clients will as well. And maybe I just need to learn it a little bit better because, when Bronwyn is sharing it, she just really gets it. But what has been helpful for me is that they've just narrowed it down to OCD reasoning has these 3 obsessional reasoning processes. So we know that the logic behind it is those 5 processes of facts, rules, personal experience, hearsay, and possibility. And to simplify it even more, there's just these 3 processes. Anytime you have an obsessional story or an obsessional doubt, you're going to see these 3 reasoning devices, these 3 obsessional types of reasoning. So let me just screen share that with you. They'll start to be able to just, again, have that bird's eye view and really be aware that, oh, right now I'm overly relying on possibility. In typical reasoning, I don't do that. Overly relying on possibility is I'm not even trying to use my senses. I just think it's possible. I imagined it and I'm lost in the what if and the maybes. You'll also see dismissal of actual evidence where I'm distrusting my sense information and um, there's just no here and now evidence for it. And I even actually see something different, right? Like imagine someone who has locked their door. They saw themselves lock it. They felt that lock and they could sense it. They could hear it click in. But when they leave the house, they then say, did I really though? Could I have forgotten? I heard a story that someone forgot and then their house got broken into, and we should keep ourselves safe. And so it's not even about accepting uncertainty, like with ERP. It's about actually knowing that certainty was already there, but you're distrusting your senses right now because you did feel it, you did see it, and you did hear it, right? And so that's dismissing actual evidence. And like with the brushing teeth example, we don't dismiss actual evidence. I could taste the mint and I know that it's true that I brushed my teeth. And then I can be certain about that and move forward with my day and my life. But when it's OCD, it's like, I did see it, I did sense it, I even remember it, but I'm wondering, could I really just not have the right memory? Or did I see it, but then I can't really trust it, right? And so I just thought this process is so fascinating about, it's not about sitting with uncertainty, it's knowing that certainty was already there. In OCD reasoning, though, the obsessional reasoning just has you doubt what you've already known to be true. You're doubting your senses. And then the third piece is just the irrelevant associations. I'm pulling in things like hearsay and about my past because I forgot something 10 years ago or someone else did something has nothing to do with what's going on right now because I have very different evidence experience right now in the moment that whatever's gone on with other people or in my past is actually not relevant. But the obsessional reasoning wants to make it relevant. And so it's pulling in irrelevant associations, it's pulling in other stories or past experiences. So on the front end, I just want to share with them this logic, the five, and then these three reasoning devices as well. So they can start to really be aware of, oh, okay, when I have an obsessional doubt, right now I am stuck in possibility in my imagination. I actually did have actual evidence that I'm doubting, and then there's irrelevant associations as well. Okay, distrusting the senses. I'm wondering how much I should go into this. Let me go into it really briefly. Distrusting the senses, there's four types of sense data. So it's not just your perceptions, what you've seen and heard, or could feel, smell, or touch. It's perceptions is one. Common sense is also something that they aren't trusting. Perceptions, common sense, inner sense data is their true intentions and desires. And then their true self is a fourth type of sense data that they're not trusting. And so when we're talking about distrusting the sense information, we're talking about all four of those. And so distrusting their senses, their perceptions could be someone who did see the lock, themselves lock it, but then they're doubting that. Dismissing their common sense is what I know to be true according to personal experience and common knowledge. I had a client who's a medical professional. She's really smart. Um, she knows how germs work, but in the moment when she saw a Band-Aid at the park and thought like, oh, what if that Band-Aid had HIV on it? And just me looking at it could get me contaminated and then I pass that disease on to my child. She's saying, in that moment, I'm not trusting my common sense. I know that's not how germs work. That's just not how the process works, but I'm terrified. And then I'm stuck in possibility. They could also distrust their inner sense data. And so for someone who's afraid they're going to harm someone, push someone, molest a child, They're not trusting their inner intentions and desires was right now to connect, to build a connection, to have fun with this child, to um, just get on the bus instead of trying to push someone, right? There's no intentions or desires. It's kind of horrifying to them, but they're not trusting that inner sense data. And then they're not trusting their true self. Their true self is someone who's often kind, caring, not someone who would harm a person or actually be really careless about something. And there's a whole module on true self, so I will just leave it there. But that's just giving a little bit more information on the sense data piece. Okay, that was module 2. And then I want to get into a space of pulling in Rebecca for one of these, the IFS piece that I use for this. Okay, any questions on module 2 before we go into the IFS demo? Okay. Seeing a couple of questions. This technique also works with phobias. Phobias that are fear-based often do a lot better with ERP. This is if they have a lot of inferential confusion, and I would just do that assessment with them. Jeff is asking, in my experience with ERP clients that have insight tend to do better and get significant change. Seems like I-CBT would be best for individuals with poor insight. Am I close to understanding the difference? I've seen good insight with both actually. Like what I'll be demonstrating too with the IFS is often they have a good awareness that this is too much. So even I had a client who was almost at 180, maxed out on her inferential confusion questionnaire, very wrapped up in distrusting herself, her senses, in the imagination. But she knew, she had a part of herself that knew, she said, I know this is too much. I know this is unreasonable. My obsessions are too much. My compulsions are too much, but I'm so scared of this bad thing happening. And so we could see a variety of levels of insight that both could be effective for. So ultimately, my determining factor is, do they have high inferential confusion? That's when I-CBT can be really helpful for them. And I just really love I-CBT and just giving people a lot of deeper insight about the process. And so that's often my go-to. Can OCD be helped with meds? Yes, there's a lot of research on high dose SSRIs can be very helpful for OCD. Rima, would this technique work with eating disorders? They do use this with body dysmorphic disorder and found it to be really helpful. Also with health anxiety, like hypochondria, this can also be very helpful because there's, again, a different type of reasoning going on where they're not trusting themselves and their senses. But with other eating disorders, there just isn't quite as much research on that right now. Don, how would this work with someone who fears going to hell as a result of blasphemous thoughts? Yeah, I would just go through that whole process with them. I have a guy who's not a priest, but also just has that scrupulosity, really being afraid that he could be an immoral person. And so we just walk through that sequence with them, see the reasoning and the process, and then really ultimately get to a space where they could trust themselves, their senses, just like they would in a non-OCD situation. Yeah, I'll send out more resources too on the I-CBT treatment manual. I actually don't love it. I hope Frederick Ardema doesn't watch this. It's just a bit confusing for me in trying to learn it from that manual. But I really love the OCD training school's workbook for the clients, and they also have a training manual for therapists to use that I think is wonderful. And it's just more simple. They have great graphics on it that can be really helpful. So right now we're just aware of the process And I don't always pull in IFS for every client, but there are moments when I see there's been a trauma history for this person, if they've shared it with me in the intake, or I'm just seeing a lot of activation as I'm just even teaching the modules to them. They're just really blended and absorbed in this process. Then I may pull in some IFS with them. And I'm going to go ahead and do that with Rebecca right now to bring forward this process. Does anyone know the difference between pinning and spotlighting? I'm just wanting to make sure, like, are you all able to see us? I spotlighted both of us, and I'm not sure what the view is for everyone. Okay, you can see both. And I don't know if I need a pin it for the recording. Um, okay, but I'll just do what works right now. So you all can see both Rebecca and I, right? Okay, looks good. Okay, so I'm gonna stop the screen share. And I've liked this process just because it just starts to have them have a different relationship with their OCD and the part of them that's just really scared. And so again, I start to pull in IFS if even just as I'm trying to teach them the sequence and the logic, it seems like they're just getting really absorbed or activated. And then I just want them to have a relationship with this part of them. And one of the most powerful, again, I want to preserve confidentiality, so I'm disguising some of the information. But I had a woman that I worked with who would get so frustrated with herself when she's in this process that she would self-harm. And so just really wanting the rumination to stop, really wanting the agonizing fears and the what ifs to stop, that after like 2 or 3 hours of just ruminating in that process, she would start to uh, harm herself. And it was just really beautiful to see through this IFS process that once she could see that this part of her that's ruminating is just a part of her that's really scared. It's often a young part in us. And so they see that this is true through OCD research that even though they're getting diagnosed about like 17 years after they've struggled, many people started this process as children and adolescents. And so it's often a young part of them that's really scared. And once they can have that relationship with their OCD, there's just a piece of self-compassion that can go into the system that then they're not having this polarization where it's just like, there's a part of me that's really scared, and then another part of me that wants to self-harm, make it stop, really criticize it. We'll often see like the part that wants to criticize the fear would be really mean and harsh. So self-harm is one representation, but it could be like, why am I so stupid? Why am I doing this? This is ridiculous. I'm ruining my family's lives. Um, and could just be really harsh with that process. And so I've seen that once we dive into the IFS, there's less polarization, there's less internal conflict, there's less that inner critic with the process. So, Rebecca, just really appreciating again you helping to bring this process to life. I know you have to leave at noon, and so I wanted to first um, do this demo with you, and then maybe we can transition into module 4 with understanding the feared self and what's going on, right? So Rebecca has shared that she has had personal struggle with OCD, and a couple of different themes also included being afraid that you're a bad person or an immoral person with scrupulosity. And then another theme was around, and maybe I could let you share, if you could share a little bit with the group, if you don't mind just
Yeah,
introducing yourself and allowing people to just connect with
yeah,
you in this process.
of course. Thank you for having me. I am an ASW in California and fresh one. I just graduated. And so I've dealt with OCD
pretty much my whole life, but I was just diagnosed a few years ago. It's very difficult to diagnose. So I lived for a long time with it, not realizing that I had it. And I have several different themes. My OCD kind of touches everything. But my main themes are, like you said, scrupulosity, that moral component, and contamination OCD. But my contamination OCD is disgust based. So it's not fear based, which kind of sets it apart from the rest of my OCD, which feels very fear based.
So you may actually have two feared possible selves when you look at the fear-based process and then the one that's disgust-based. But maybe there's common links and we can explore that together, right?
Sure.
But yeah, just really appreciate you being open about your own journey and struggle. You're saying probably my whole life. I hear that from many clients, or they could remember just from a really young age, that this process has started for them. I had a client who said, I remember praying over all of my stuffed animals and feeling like I needed to do that to make sure that they're all safe since they were a little girl. And then you could just see like the sweetness in that process too, right? Like you could really see um, the feared self that comes up for people, those obsessional doubts like, what if I could harm someone or what if I'm bad, is truly often the opposite of who they really are. And so in this process, I often even already do some positive reframing around these fears. Um, on like, what does that show about what you really value? That you're afraid of this, you're afraid of becoming a bad person, or you're afraid of a certain contamination with food. It's because I really care about well-being and health, and I care about doing the right thing. Being a good person really matters, right? And so they can begin to just see their values and why this process is here. It's not because they're broken, it's because something really matters to them, and they're really scared of not being that thing that matters so much. I'm wondering if you relate to all of that, Rebecca.
I do very much. And I think I've explored quite a bit all of this, but being able to kind of flip the script a little bit and see that explore the values has been so transformative for me, just to realize that, oh, these are I value this, and that's why these things come up for me. And those things that I value, just kind of holding on to those when I get into a spiral. So it's been really helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so I'm imagining we've done a couple of modules together, and we're in this process where it feels like, oh, maybe doing some brief internal family systems, which is IFS, could be helpful in helping this person just have a different relationship with their OCD. I would just share it with you, like Rebecca. It seems like there are these moments that you just feel just really terrified in your body. What shows up for you when you're thinking of potentially like, what if I am a bad person or something bad happening where it shows that you're not moral? How does that show up in your body?
I think in my body, I kind of make myself smaller. Um, when I have these thoughts, I don't want to be seen. I don't want to be perceived by others, because what if they find out that they've uncovered the secret that I'm bad, or I'm um, untrustworthy, or whatever, the thought of the day is. So I notice in my body, I try to make myself smaller. I get a lot of anxiety. I get a lot of
Mm,
tenseness, um, as if I'm in a haunted house and ready to turn a corner, and I'm ready
yeah.
for something to jump out at me, but it's all the time.
Mm. Yeah, and I can imagine just how agonizing that must feel, where that's in your body and that feels so scary if you're about to turn the corner in that haunted house. We can all be familiar with that feeling, but then it's constant and it's all the time. I can imagine it's quite exhausting for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm hearing a lot of anxiety, tenseness, just really wanting to shrink yourself. There's anxiety that you would be seen, and then people would actually know the truth about you. Am I hearing that
Yeah.
right? How does the
Yes.
anxiety and tenseness show up?
I'm sorry, say that again.
How does the anxiety and tenseness show up in your body?
Can you expand on that?
Yeah, you said you feel a lot of anxiety and you feel tense. And so for some people, it could be like, I'm feeling like the tightness in my chest, or it's hard to breathe,
Gotcha.
or my throat's
For me, it's a
closing.
tenseness. Yeah, it's a tenseness in my shoulders. I carry a lot of tenseness in my shoulders, so my shoulders hike up.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and I constantly notice that I've brought my elbows quite close to my body, and my shoulders will hike up a little bit. And I hold myself very still. So it's a feeling, a sense of being ready for something to go wrong, essentially.
Yeah, of course. Okay, so tense feelings in your shoulders. And then just like
Yeah.
this readiness for something bad to happen, just almost like preparing yourself, right? Um, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna walk through the IFS process. I'm just building a connection with this part, and I'll type it into the chat for those of you who are familiar. This is right now just working with the 6 Fs, the protective parts, where right now I'm just focusing on this part of her body and how it's showing up. So we're finding and focusing on the part OCD shows up. Okay. Okay, Rebecca, can you see if you could just take a moment to connect with that anxiety and how it's showing up as that tenseness in your shoulders? And just take a moment to um, see how it's showing up for you. And it could be through a sensation, it could be through a visual, or maybe even certain thoughts that you're seeing come up around that anxiety.
I think I'm coming back to the image of making myself smaller. And
Mhm.
that's what keeps kind of jumping up for me is this fear of being perceived. I want to hide. So that's how that kind of comes out for me.
Yeah. Mhm. Can you connect with this part of you that wants to get smaller and wants to hide? Can you see that there?
Yeah.
How are you feeling towards this part as you see that part just really wants to get smaller and hide?
Part of me wants to yell at her and just say, take up space. It's okay. And part of me wants to be judgmental to her. Um, and I think there is another part of me that just wants to give her a hug.
Mhm. Yeah, often there's lots of mixed feelings, isn't there, when we connect with these parts of us.
Yeah.
So seeing that one there that wants to shrink and hide, there's another part showing up that's like frustrated. I want to yell at you, take up space, stop hiding. And then there's another part that's judging. Can I hear
Yeah.
can I hear a bit more about what's the judgment that shows up?
The judgment is get over it.
Mm.
It's not real. Uh, People are not thinking about you the way that you think they're thinking about you. um,
Yeah.
and just stop. It's a lot of judgment about the thoughts themselves and how I'm
That's right.
reacting to it.
Yeah. Does that make sense to you when you're seeing this, that there's just all of these internal conflicts or emotions?
Yeah.
It's a complex process, isn't it? Does it feel like the part
Definitely.
of you that has those judgmental thoughts towards this part is the same one that wants to yell at her? Or is that two different parts of
Yeah,
you?
I think there's frustration there, and I think that
Mhm.
that all kind of comes from an underlying feeling of frustration. towards myself for having this experience. Yeah. So I think they are linked.
Yeah. That part of you that's frustrated with the part that wants to hide, what is it hoping to get or to do when it's yelling at this part or frustrated at this part?
I think it's hoping to help me live a better life, where I feel safe to be in the world and to be perceived. And I think it's trying to drag me there.
Trying to drag you there and this part there that wants to hide. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we're really seeing this part that seems harsh and critical. It's actually really hoping that you could live your full life and really wants to drag you there in that process. And what is it afraid of would happen if you didn't? If it didn't yell at you in this way and criticize you and criticize this part of you?
That I would never feel the courage to not make myself small, to live my life and take risks and grow. That I would just feel a lot of disappointment in myself.
Yeah. How are you feeling towards this frustrated yelling part now as you really hear, oh, it wants me to live my full life? That's the hope. And the fear is that I won't. I won't access the courage. I'd stay small. I'd stay in disappointment.
Well, I think the part of me that has a lot of compassion just wants to give that scared small part of me a hug, really understands the frustrated part and kind of feels like we have the same goal, but we're going about totally opposite ways and we're using opposite strategies, right? And so I think like both of those parts want me to live a fulfilled life. And one wants to coax me to the stream, and the other one wants to throw me in and see if I can swim.
Yeah, exactly. Can you see if you could just take a moment to send understanding and compassion to those parts? Just as you're saying, like, oh, I understand they're wanting the same things for me. And just see how that critical part responds to your understanding of why it's there.
I think the critical part feels like, okay, finally, somebody's listening. Finally, I'm being heard. Finally, you're allowing yourself some space here to hear what I have to say. And I think giving her that space makes her less likely to throw me in the water. She feels less intense, and less aggressive.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? When these parts of us really feel seen and heard, and we just make space for them, they can actually naturally soften back because they're like, finally, I'm feeling seen and heard. I don't have to get as loud or aggressive as much. Just like anyone, once I feel seen and heard, I don't have to then continue to get louder to try to be heard. So this part's feeling heard by you. Am I hearing that right? And that allows her to soften back. Yeah. Yeah. And the fears make a lot of sense to no longer hide so you can access courage and live a fuller life. And can you see if this part of you would be willing to continue to just make a bit more space for us to connect with this one that does want to hide? Because we totally understand why she's there and wants to throw you into the water, because she wants what's best for you. And at the same time, we can really allow that process, this common goal, to take place if we make a bit more space to help this this scared one that wants to hide. Can you see if that part would be willing to give us a little bit of space and continue to soften back for that?
Yeah, I think she feels more heard. So I think she can step back a little bit.
Yeah.
So yes, I think
I
she
know
can.
she can come in at any time to let us know if there are any concerns, because she matters, right? The message has really mattered.
Yeah.
We see the care for a meaningful life, the care to live a full life. That's really important. Um, and if you could take a moment to send some appreciation to that part as well, for how it's
Yeah.
tried to help and for it willing to make a bit of space even right now for us to
Yeah,
connect with this
absolutely.
other one. With that one softening back some, can you see again how you feel towards this one that wants to hide, this part of you that wants to hide now?
I feel a stronger impulse to give her a hug. And not just that, but to pick her up and start the journey to bringing her out of that dark corner that she wants to stay in. And I think she kind of feels a little bit ready for that too. Because
Beautiful.
now she doesn't have frustrated Rebecca yelling at her.
Yes, exactly. Um, can you take a moment to send all of that her way? That desire to help, that desire to give her a hug and just see how she responds to that presence and energy.
Yeah, I think she's ready to take up more space.
Mhm. How's she responding to your presence there?
I think she feels more courage.
Mhm.
I think she feels less encumbered. Um, I don't think she feels heard yet, but I
Yeah.
think she feels ready to speak.
Yeah. I don't know. We really want to hear from her. How far are you in terms of feet apart when you see that visual there?
I would say probably about 3 feet from sweet Rebecca and about 10 feet from frustrated Rebecca.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, the sweet one. Um, is 3 feet a comfortable conversational distance apart, or does it feel okay to see if you could get a little bit closer to her?
I think she feels compelled to have some space right now.
Mhm. Yeah,
So
we
I
want to
think three
respect
feet
that.
is good.
3 feet feels good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you just send our way that we do want to listen and understand what's it been
Yeah.
like for her? And can you first just ask how old she is?
She is probably about 4 or 5.
Mm. How old does she think you are? If you could just ask that part and see
She
what
thinks I'm
comes up.
32.
Mhm.
Yeah, she definitely sees me as an adult.
Yeah. And is that your actual age?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So she's a 4 or 5-year-old part that's been scared here, and she really wants to speak. What would she like for you to know about her role, why she's been hiding?
Yeah. I think she would like me to know that she kept me safe when we were little.
Mhm.
And we had to be small. We had to make ourselves unseen and unheard. And that kept us safe. And we're just doing what we learned. And we're doing it really well.
Mhm.
And we don't want to let go of it because it worked.
Yes. Wow. This little one's been working hard for a long time for you to keep you safe.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. How are you feeling towards her just hearing that?
I feel a lot of empathy for her. And I feel sad for her
Mm-hmm.
because I wish she didn't have to learn that way of being.
Mm-hmm.
I wish she was encouraged more to be brave and take chances and take risks. I wish she had the safety to do
Yeah, I'm just hearing a lot of compassion for this young part that's
that.
just
Yeah.
had to take on this role because it was hard. And you have all of these wishes for safety, for encouragement, for her to expand or get bigger or to reach her full life, right? What
Yeah.
what your system wants for you. See if you can just continue to send that empathy and all of that care her way and see how she responds.
I think I sense some anger from her.
Mm-hmm.
And I think she feels very justified in that anger because she's like, I'm trying to help you. I'm trying to save you. I've been here working my butt off for almost 30 years and you didn't appreciate me. And I think she feels a little vindicated because I think the other Rebeccas are kind of seeing her value and seeing her function and seeing how important she was and how important she still is.
Yeah, she's helped you to survive
Yeah.
and kept you safe. Does the anger make sense to you, Rebecca, when a part
Yeah.
of us hasn't felt seen or appreciated? Yeah. What do you want her to know?
Yeah.
Hearing that, hearing the anger, hearing not feeling appreciated.
I think I want her to know that I do appreciate that she sacrificed so much to stay in the corner and keep us safe and make herself small. And I appreciate that she did that for so long and she doesn't have to anymore.
Mm. Yeah, see if you could share all of that with her and if she can take that in and how she responds.
Yeah, I think she definitely feels receptive to that. um, Again, a little vindicated, but
Mhm.
also just relief,
Mhm.
just a lot of relief that she can kind of put the sword down.
Is she protecting another little one in there? Can you ask why she's had to work so hard?
Wow, I didn't even think of that, but maybe she is.
Mhm. Yeah,
That resonates. Yeah.
yeah. Can you see if you can ask that part directly to see if she can confirm that or not?
It feels true that she is. Yeah.
Yeah. What is she afraid of would happen to this little one if she didn't work so hard to hide, to be vigilant about her goodness?
That somebody would hurt her, that
Mm,
we would hurt her.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what would it be like for her to know that we could help this little one so she doesn't have to work so hard anymore?
Again, just total relief. Yeah.
Mhm. And make sure this one doesn't get hurt and actually protect her and help her.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's relief at feeling like I finally have help and I finally can rest.
Yeah. And send that to the whole system. Help is here. Help is on the way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Today we're just building a connection and just demonstrating that. So to bring it to a close, Rebecca, you've connected with these three parts of you, where there's a protective part that's worked really hard to shrink, to make small for the sense of safety, because she had to. And then there was another part that's been critical of her, yelled at her, um, with very good intentions, right? Like just wanting you and um, your whole system to just really live a full life, not live in disappointment. And then you also connected with, there's probably a little one that's needed a lot of protection, because when we know there's one that's working really hard, it's been protecting one that's been really hurt. Um,
Yeah.
and so with her confirming that, it can be helpful first to send all of these parts a lot of appreciation. And so just take a moment to do that. Send appreciation to all the parts that have worked so hard, to the little one, for letting us know that she's there. And then if there was a commitment you can make to these three parts of you that you've connected with, is there a commitment that makes sense?
Yeah. As soon as you said that, what came very clearly through my head is we're a team. So we can work together.
If you could send that to them and how they respond to that. We're a team. We're going to work together.
Yeah. I think there's relief from everywhere because they all feel like they've been working so hard.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Rebecca. I know you got 6 minutes before you have to run. So I just want to make a little bit
Thank
of
you.
space for the thoughts from you and what this was like. And then if there were questions from the group before you leave. What was this like for you to connect with these parts that show up when OCD is activated?
That was really moving for me. It helped me make some discoveries. And it's so different from the treatment that I've had for OCD. And it's exploring something that I haven't necessarily explored before. Um, and I do think that this is going to help me have so much more compassion and understanding for what's going on when I have those
Mm.
obsessions and compulsions, and maybe
Right.
even kind of inserting that in between the two to help me feel safe and not need to do the compulsion. We'll see.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. This is just the beginning of that process, but really loving what you said,
Yeah.
that it's moving. I feel moved as well. I always feel very moved by this work with clients and the insights that they get. And when I shared with you all the client who self-harmed when she would ruminate for so long, she completely stopped self-harming once she saw the young part that was scared. And she was like, "Mm, that's like to me hurting a little 5-year-old." And I love children. And I just couldn't continue to do that, because then I see, oh, this is a part of me that's just young and scared and is working really hard to protect some really deep pain. Right. And so just that alone, we're just building a connection and a relationship. But the power in this is what I see is the compassion, the self-compassion starts to seep in. And then they could see that the core self can take the lead in the system. The core self is the one that said, we're a team. We're going to be in this together. There's a core self that's the leader in the system. So then it's not that scared little one that's taking the lead anymore, or that really critical one that's taking the lead. And then that feels a lot better for the whole system as well. So Okay, 3 minutes of questions for Rebecca. Lots of appreciation for you, Rebecca. People are saying it's brave, loving your inner child. Um, yeah, we have the young protective parts. We didn't ask how old that critical one is, but usually it's a little bit older. The I always see a fear part that's protecting a vulnerable one, and then one that's criticizing it really harshly in some way. And that one's usually a little bit older, but that's usually the dynamics I always see in OCD. Awesome work. Love how IFS takes it from didactic to experiential and really just understanding and connecting on a deeper level with these parts, right? Like I know them and I know this part's afraid and does compulsions and feels the anxiety. But yeah, I love the experiential work as well. Yeah, lots of appreciation. Any other questions about the process or what it's like for the client before we have 2 more valuable minutes with Rebecca before she has to run? Yeah, Diana is saying, I like to ask the adult to reassure the child. Let the adult drive the car and the child can be a loving, joyful child. Yeah, I love that. That's the ultimate goal if IFS is the core self can take the lead. And the child then doesn't have to work so hard anymore to protect or to keep safe. They're just stuck in that role, as we all know with trauma, it just gets locked there and it feels like it just continues to engage in the same pattern for safety. And just wondering, would a disgust-based OCD still be fear-based? Um, Usually if there's disgust, I mean, we'll definitely see both. Like I've seen where they both have contamination that drives disgust for them, and there's other things that they're afraid of. So yes, it can exist. Both can exist in one person for sure. Yeah. And the same process can really help them move forward. So okay, so 11:59. I'm gonna go ahead and let you run to your appointment, Rebecca, but just a lot of sincere appreciation for you, your vulnerability. Um, I personally feel just a lot of love for all of the parts that have showed up and for you as a person for doing this, for your journey. I just really admire it. Um, yeah, I just have so much passion for this work and so excited for you to continue in this process for yourself too. Take care for now.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this experience.
Thank
I appreciate
you.
all of you too. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Okay. So moving forward then with the I-CBT modules. So I just kind of weave in and out in this process. The I-CBT, each module is about 1 session. And then if I do an IFS session, it may be half, it may be the whole one. And then I just go back into the next process to really help them learn about these parts of them and I-CBT. Okay. Any other thoughts or questions about that demo before we go to the next module? I just moved it and I realized it messed up the screen share. Okay. Yeah, yeah, it's a gentle process for sure. And again, it's just kind of winging it. And if it feels like, oh, maybe they could really build this more compassionate relationship with their OCD, this is a really cool way to just have them connect with that part of them. Because as you could see, like Rebecca is so gentle and sweet and kind, and then there's still always a very harsh, critical part. Like the client that I'm talking about is truly the sweetest, kindest human being. And that self-harming, that self-critical voice that wants to hit or get violent with also yells harshly at this fear part. It's just really fascinating. And so once we can soften that inner conflict and that polarization, I just find it feels like they're less activated when I'm teaching the modules. And it almost feels like if we look at a family where there's one that's being violent towards the family member, it's very hard for that one to heal and to move forward in this process if there's another part of them that continues to just be very critical, judgmental, violent, or harsh. And so that's where I see the power of positive reframing from TEAM-CBT, where we could see the part's good intentions and the power of IFS and compassion as well. Okay, so we got about 30 minutes left. I think we could probably get through the next 3 modules, or I forgot there's a Q&A too, so maybe at least 2 modules and then do some Q&A with all of you through each one. Okay, let's see. There was a question, how did I know to ask the question? Because I see that the compulsion or the fear, like there's one that wants to hide, but that's the one that shows up as well of like, this is how she responds as anxiety when she has OCD. And so the anxiety is like the compulsion is to hide, get small, I'm feeling anxious. It's usually a protective part. It's not the wounded, vulnerable, what IFS would call the exile. So you can always just ask, and it doesn't hurt to ask because if they say no, then I know that's the wounded exile. I thought it was a protective part, but it wasn't. But if it's serving a function to like keep safe, protect, it had a role to do something, then it's likely a protective part. And there's another vulnerable part that's wounded that ultimately, in my mind, I would want to get to healing, establishing a relationship with. That's probably the one that's really hurt. And when there's a wounded part, there's gonna be protective parts that's gonna work really hard to try to protect it. So that's how I knew to ask that question. Did that answer the question there, Rob? Let me know if so. When you talk about you relating to the parts, is that the self? Yeah, I just assume that I'm working with the core self. And so when I talk about you, I'm talking about the core self. Can you see that part, how you're experiencing that part? How do you feel towards that part? The you is their core self, and then they can have some distance from these parts of them that show up, the self-critical part, the hiding part that's actually trying to protect and keep safe a little one. Okay. So we've now reviewed the sequence of OCD. We've also looked at the reasoning and the logic of OCD. And then next we look at the obsessional story. So the obsessional story just really builds upon the logic and reasoning that's already there. And this is just that inferential confusion we were talking about. So I just shared this with them, the Stephen King quote, have they related to this? The thing under my bed waiting to grab my ankle isn't real. I know that. And I also know that if I am careful enough to keep my ankle under the covers, it will never be able to grab my ankle. And so I think we've all related to this process of inferential confusion where it's in my imagination, but it feels like I have to do something in reality to feel safe. And many people would say they've related to that. The main thing for this module is just having them speak for OCD and to share that story and really have them see the power of story. Okay. So before I have them read their own story, I just want you all to engage in some audience participation here. They'll have an obsessional story that pulls in all of the doubts and reasonings from module 2. But first, I just want to share with them, there's always a story right now that drives your OCD. And I'm going to share with you how powerful story is. A story is rich in detail. You're the main character or the center of attention. And it's just told in the first person. There's a beginning, there's a middle, and an end. It's rich in detail. You or someone you loved is the center. It's told in the first person often, and there's a beginning, middle, and end. And so I just go through this module with them, and you all can just go through this with me. And you can type into the chat. Why is this not moving though? Okay. Sorry, this is a different one than I'm used to using. Usually it goes to the right, but I was supposed to just scroll up. So, okay. So just if you could answer into the chat with me if you were the client, would you eat this apple? Just from looking at it. Tell me yes or no, or maybe you'll have mixed feelings. Lisa's saying no. Most people are saying yes, no. Maybe I want to wash it first. I don't have enough information around it, right? It's the same stimulus. You wouldn't eat the leaf or the stem. That's good. That's good reasoning. Reasoning there, Rob. Yeah, a lot of people have mixed feelings around this, but the story will then really drive your feelings and how much you want to interact with this object. Okay. So imagine there's this story around it. This apple was picked 15 minutes ago after a rainstorm, and the person who picked it brought it inside, washed their hands. They washed the apple with really clean water. They put it on a clean paper towel, and then they're offering this apple to you. This is someone you trust and care about. Would you eat this apple now? Yeah, even more eagerly. I'm seeing exclamation marks. Absolutely, for sure. Yum. It's an organic apple that someone has picked and grown and cared for. What feelings do you have towards that apple with that story? Or even what feelings are coming up with being offered this? Mm. Yeah, you're feeling sweetness, not feeling fear that it'll hurt you. You can connect with love, appreciation, wanting to move towards it, feeling gratitude, a sense of freshness around it, right? Stories are powerful in affecting our feelings and in affecting how likely we'll engage with an object. Same object, same stimuli, a whole different story here. This apple has been sitting on a counter in a kitchen that has a cockroach infestation. Yum, right? It's been wiped down with a dry paper towel that someone found just balled up in the counter, but they thought that paper towel is just fine. The person brings it to you. You know, they've been taking care of a sick kid, and they said, sorry, I haven't had time to wash my hands, but it's fine. How do you feel about just looking at the chat? Yuck, ew, no. It probably creates some disgust as well, right? And for the question, can there be disgust and fear? I've had clients say, I feel both. I feel disgusted and I'm afraid to get sick from this. Yeah. What are your feelings now towards this apple and just what's coming up in this situation? How likely are you to engage? I take it and be nice. I've had clients who said that, Megan. They'd say like, oh, I'll say, oh, I'm not hungry right now. And then they'll take it and throw it in the trash where the person can't see and then put on hand sanitizer or really wash their hands after that. Yeah, you're feeling like it's contaminated. There's fear that you'll get sick. Feeling really unsafe. Feels wasteful to throw away the apple. Yeah. But maybe you go home and you could wash it really well if you still want to eat it. But I know my urge is like, I may want to be nice and say, oh, thank you, but I'm not hungry right now. Naked and afraid participants would love this process. Our participants are funny. Yeah, it's not healthy, it's gross. Exactly. And then just seeing that stories really matter. They have power over how we feel, over a situation, how likely you'll interact with it. And then just having them begin to tell a story. I like to actually do the negative one of this first and then the positive. But I'll just have them say, can you tell a negative story about this child on the swing? And then they'll have all sorts of things that could come up. And then have them tell a positive story and then just have them process how do these stories impact your feelings, what's showing up for you, and they could just start to be aware of the power of story. And then the main piece in this module is then having them understand their own story. Oh, sorry, that's the next one that I wanted to go over with you. That's going to be a group practice. But then you're just having them share their obsessional story. If you could speak up for OCD, what is that story? If we could add a lot of rich detail, pull in all of the logic from module 2. Rich in detail, first person, talk for your OCD. This is an example story that could come up And usually it's longer than this paragraph. It's easy for clients to tell this story. Same stimuli, same trigger, right? But it'll all come up for them. Like I can't go too far from home. So it could start with like I'm getting ready to get out of the house. The OCD story would have all of this. I could go crazy. Who knows what's wrong with me? My family member has schizophrenia. So this is someone whose doubt is I can't get too far because then I'll lose my mind and then I just won't be able to come back in. Yeah. And then you see they pull in a lot of different logic from the OCD process. A family member has schizophrenia, so that's personal experience, maybe a hearsay. I've heard a story, right? It's possible. I could go crazy and lose my mind. When I'm anxious, I can see myself doing it. So maybe that could happen to me as well. And then just have them really flesh out that story. So for my client who's afraid she forgot to turn off the oven, it's possible that I did that. I heard a story about someone doing that and it burnt down their house. The fact is, human beings are flawed and we forget. And then just have them really flesh all of the details out. And is there a middle to this? Is there an end to this? The middle of it is my house burns down. The end of it is I lose my dog. We're devastated. We lose everything that matters to us. And then they pull in all of those other elements. Those are just examples of the story where they're pulling that in. And then we share with them the counter story. And the counter story is not an intervention. Again, this is just turning on the lights to the haunted house, seeing that is there another story that's possible? And how would it impact you if another story is possible? And so we're starting with the same triggers, but you're adding in details from reality to give a different story. Right? So from reality, again, this is your typical reasoning. Typically, we pull in things from reality to come to a conclusion, to make a judgment about what's going on. Like, did I brush my teeth? I'm bringing in details from reality. I can feel my teeth are cleaner. There's no plaque. I can taste the mint. So I'm starting with the same trigger, but now can I pull in details from reality to give a different story? Again, this is not an intervention. It's not trying to counter the content. It's trying to let them see the power of story and how would it impact them if they had a different story. And so we're trying to pull in, if you trusted your senses, what would the counter story look like? So for someone who's afraid, like they go crazy or they cut themselves, the counter story could start with, it's the same thing. I see the knife, but then I'm pulling in, I have a knife out to cut my vegetables. That's just what I'm doing. I've done this many times. I'm usually someone who's careful with knives, right? And if they could trust their senses, I've never used a knife to harm myself, like cut out my tongue or harm someone else. And then I just have them add in more pieces. So if you then just had the doubt, what if I forgot to turn off the oven? And if there was a counter story where you then could pull in pieces from reality and where you could trust yourself, your 4 types of sense data, what would the story look like? Sometimes they may struggle with coming up with the story. I may help them bring in pieces, but they would say things like, I'm leaving the house and I'm having the doubt, what if I forgot to turn off the oven? I know that I'm someone who's responsible and I actually have a really good memory. And so I do remember that I did click it off when I was near it. I could sense that it was cool, not warm. I did see that the light was off. And trusting, their common sense too is that the ovens don't then just suddenly turn on. Because in this client's doubt, she was afraid of that. What if I thought it was off, but it wasn't actually, and then it came back on, or the electric current somehow then led it to come back on. So I need to go back in and check just one more time. But if she were to trust her common sense, she said, and yeah, and I have worked appliances really well from my personal experience and my common knowledge. I know that ovens don't just then suddenly turn back on, and if they're off, I can move forward, right? And just leave the house without coming back in. So then she's trusting her senses, she's pulling things in from reality. And then just asking them certain questions about module 3 could be, is this story possible? Is this a likely story? And a lot of times they would say, like, yeah, that is a likely story. It is possible. It is another story from my feared story. And it's actually more realistic. Like I'll have clients say, this is just the actual story. So for a client who is afraid of like, what if I poured the wrong thing into my baby's formula? So she was afraid that she's accidentally poured in coffee creamer. And her real story, her OCD story said she did that. She poisoned her baby. Her baby gets really sick. They have to take her to the ER. In the counter story, she came up with, I put the coffee creamer in a different area, so I know it's separate from the formula. I read that it was formula. I see that it's a different color. The creamer's lighter. This one's darker. And again, we're not trying to convince of the details. This is just using typical logic and reasoning, where you just know what you see and hear, and that's how you come to conclusions. And so she said, I know I poured that. My baby's fed, happy, sitting there, just clapping, usually cheering. And then we move forward with our day and we have a good time together. So that was the counter story. And when I asked her, is this a possible story? She said, this is just reality. This is what happens every single day. Even though my OCD story is going on, this is actually just what happens. So then they can start to connect with that and understand the power of story. The feared possible self is one of my favorite things about this module, about this treatment process. Okay, but I realize we got about 10 minutes. This can be really quick though. And then I want to make some time for questions. But the feared possible self, these are the first 4 modules about how is OCD constructed. The feared possible self is such a core doubt and a core piece that drives all of their obsessional doubts. So you may even see a variety of different themes, like contamination, pedophilia. So imagine this is one person who's afraid to get someone sick. Like my client who didn't want to get sick, then she'll make her kids sick. That she could also sexually abuse her nieces and nephews. She could say something careless that's racist, could accidentally stab somebody. And so in ERP, we'd see like, oh my gosh, this is 5 different themes. We're going to need to come up with a lot of different types of exposures. In I-CBT, it says there's all of these what if doubts that's from different themes, but there's just one feared self. Who is this person afraid of becoming when they have all of these doubts? And so you can just look at, is there a common link, a common self-construct that this person has when they have all of these doubts? What does this have in common? When you see someone who doesn't want to spread illness or say something mean to hurt someone, be racist, sexually abuse a child, or stab somebody, what do you see that it has in common? What is this person afraid of doing? Absolutely. So you see it's ego dystonic. It doesn't align with their values at all. Yeah, they're afraid of hurting other people, not having control of themselves. Exactly. And what kind of person hurts other people? What kind of person then molests, stabs, say cruel things, just intentionally spread illness and harm? Yeah, maybe their feared self is I could be someone who's a bully. I could be someone who's evil. I could be a bad person. And then we share with them that this is a doubt just like any other doubt, but it's a doubt about the self. And it's going to have the same reasoning devices, right? Yeah. And then you all are coming up with great examples. And I just use the words that resonate with them. Because then they say, I'm afraid of becoming a mean person. I'm afraid of being an evil person, a cruel person. And then that's the core that actually drives all of their obsessional doubts. It's not just random, it's because they're terrified of becoming this type of person. And it also drives all of their compulsions. Their compulsions are there to prevent themselves from becoming a bad, evil, cruel, vindictive, mean person. Right? And so it gives them a lot of insight and explanation as to why do they have their specific doubts and why do they engage in these specific compulsions, because they don't want to be a negligent person, a mean person, a bad person. Common ones are like, I'm someone who is fragile and easily gets sick. And then their feared consequences is then I'll be unavailable to my loved ones or I won't have a quality of life. So that's the consequence. But the feared self is I'm someone who could easily get sick, or I am someone who's negligent and careless. I could be someone who's actually bad and evil. So I got to do everything that I can to prevent myself from being this person because this is the opposite of who I want to be. As someone mentioned, it's the opposite of their values. Other common ones are like negligence is a lot. I'm someone who's harmful, bad. I've had a client who combined both. I could be a person who's more morally negligent. And so would then just really track things where could I have been immoral in this? And I don't want to be negligent around my morals. So everything that they did was about tracking their and making sure that they weren't negligent around their morals. So yeah, this just gives people a lot of insight because it just drives so much. And then once they know this is a doubt like any other doubt, I can even break down of like what led you to believe this about yourself. There's probably a story about the feared self. There's probably logic and reasoning. And a lot of times what's interesting is I see a personal experience as well. Let me see if there's a slide about that. No. But like it could actually be a parent was this way. I had a parent who was really selfish and narcissist, and then I'm really scared that I would become a selfish person too. So there may be a personal experience that drives that. And again, you see the OC reasoning. That's not relevant to me. Just because this person was that way or I witnessed that doesn't mean that I'll become that, but there's a terror in this that because I witnessed this, now it's relevant to me. I'm pulling in that irrelevant association and distrusting my true self. And I am stuck and absorbed in possibility in my imagination, right? So those were the three obsessional reasoning devices. And we see that in this OCD self. So this is the feared possible self. That's the common link. There's typically not more than one feared possible self, but sometimes there can be two for some people, but no more than that. And I will bring it to a close here. So next time I'll go through the other modules. I'll probably skip a couple of the later ones, like module 10 and 12, but this is a really cool process that just brings a lot of insight for people. So now we've gone through the main four. The first four is how OCD is constructed. And then next time I'll share with you all how we deconstruct OCD. I didn't get to the hidden emotion and the other process as well, but we will get there. But feel free to read that handout. I think those are the two tools on the front end. Hidden emotion is from TEAM-CBT, and then the here and now exposure is just from the book Overcoming Unwanted Intrusive Thoughts. Okay, questions do you all have? I'll send out the feedback form for you all to complete just right after this. Okay. I'm realizing I forgot to create that link for you, so I will get that to all of you. Yes. Yeah, so a lot of gratitude, thinking it was interesting. I'm so glad. Yes, I will send all of that out. I'll send out the feedback form. I'll send out the OCD training school with that specific training. And I really like their training manual for the therapists. Okay. Yes, just appreciating the training. I'm so glad it resonated with you. Do you do this work with kids? I personally don't. I'm scared of kids. I have two kids myself, but I thought I wanted to be a child therapist, and I worked in an inpatient setting for 2 weeks, and I was done with children. But a couple of the I-CBT trainers do work with children, and they have used this process with children as well. There was an age, a cutoff point that Frederick had shared, but I can't remember what that is now in that process. But I'm at the belief of if they can understand this process and they have the ability to understand the reasoning, like I think most adolescents do, some older children do, then go for it. Yeah. Yeah, a question about the assessment you mentioned at the start. Do you do that in session or the client does it for homework? I have clients do the assessment at intake. And so if I know they have OCD or they're seeking that treatment in my intake, I have the ICQ, the Inferential Confusion Questionnaire. And then I also have the Y box because I like using both of those to understand what some of their themes are. And I just do the self screening one. That's just been the easiest for me. And the Y box, once I started to do I-CBT, I just have them answer those 10 questions. So there's 5 questions about obsessions and 5 questions about compulsions, how frequently they're engaging in obsessions and compulsions, how much it's impacting their lives. And yeah, for many people, I'm doing the Y box without ERP. They have gone from severe, like my most recent guy that has done the mid, we're not even done yet, but has gone from 26, which is severe, on the Y box down to 11. So not quite in remission because you need a 1 to 7, but really close and really feeling like he's getting to reclaim his life, which is beautiful. And that's what we want to see for people who've been so tortured in this process. Is the Inferential Confusion Questionnaire available to use for free? Yes, it is. I'll send that out as well. So I'll send out the training website, the Inferential Confusion Questionnaire. You know, they are such a generous community because they've shared all of these slides for free for us to use. There's handouts that are free. So I'll share with you all that Facebook group, and the Inferential Confusion Questionnaire is free as well for you to freely use with clients. So much learning. It looks like someone to have some knowledge of IFS. Thank you. Okay, yes. So to do IFS, yes, have some knowledge of IFS. If you're interested in that, there are some low-cost training. Someone had sent me a Frank Anderson training that's coming up that looks really excellent because I know the IFSI trainings are quite expensive and hard to get into. And honestly, I don't think it's that hard. Like, there's 5 steps for the working with protective systems, and then there's 6 steps. I'm sorry, 6 Fs, and then 6 steps for the unburdening. I think TEAM-CBT has been a lot harder to learn. I-CBT has been so confusing for me initially. Like, it's taken me about 2 years to feel just more competent with it and understanding it on a deeper level. But I don't think IFS is actually that complicated. And so I think I'll send out the resource about the Frank Anderson course as well. The IFS Learning Circle is only like $495, I think. And then you could learn IFS through that process too. Okay, where can you find the assessment questions? I'll send that out to you all. The Y box you can just Google. That's easy to find. It's YBOCS, the Yale Brown Obsessive Compulsive Scale. Yeah, online learning for IFS, you can take at your own pace. Yeah, I think that's the online circle. So, okay, it is 12:30. Thank you, everyone. I'll be sending out the feedback and just really appreciate your time, your dedication to the learning. Always great and fun to connect with all of you. And then I look forward to sharing the rest of the modules with you all and how to deconstruct OCD. Thank you again. Thank you, Michelle, for helping to co-host and muting people.